Thank you very much, Marco, and everybody else for inviting me down to Exeter today. And I hope that what I say will make some sense to you. It's certainly important for me as a non-scientist that commercialization is destroying the possibilities and future possibilities of space exploration on one hand, and is bringing the human race on planet Earth closer to what could possibly be a new war. So I want to make a case against commercialization of space. And to start off, this one? No, this one?
Yes.
Right. The most important document that regulates the relationship between humankind and what we have over and above our atmosphere is the Outer Space Treaty from 1967. It's been called the constitutional law of space. And it's important in terms of the timeline, when it was agreed by states, and also in terms of its substantive content. In 1967, it was more or less agreed in the West that the Soviet Union was still ahead of the United States in terms of space technology and know-how. The Soviets had been the first to send a satellite up. The Soviets had been the first to put a man into full Earth orbit. The American response was a suborbital flight. The Soviets were the first to send a capsule into space with more than one astronaut in it. The Soviets were the first to do the spacewalk. But by the end of the 1960s, the Soviet Union was unable to continue to finance what it was doing. The Americans had decided that it is a priority and they'd put a lot of money into it. However, the United States was still worried about Soviet advances, and the Soviets were worried about not being able to maintain the same pace. Therefore, in spite of the animosity that existed between the two big ideological camps, they decided that they need to come to a compromise with regard to what is going to happen in space in future. And that compromise was a very rational and reasonable compromise. Space is the province of all mankind, the treaty says. The province of mankind means no state can make sovereign claims, or no state can make claims with regard to rights of ownership or any other kinds of rights in space. No state can put nuclear weapons in orbit around the Earth, or put nuclear weapons on the moon or any other planetary body. Space would not be militarized, and all activity in outer space would be in the interests of all countries on Earth, irrespective of geographical size, population size, or political or economic clout. All activities would be carried out on the basis of equality of all states. And again, most importantly, nothing is subject to national appropriation. There will be no proprietary rights. Nobody can own anything in space. Nobody can buy or sell or rent anything that exists outside of planet Earth. Now, while the United States was behind the Soviet Union, they agreed. And they agreed because they didn't want the Soviet Union to have an advantage. And the Soviets agreed because they feared falling behind. By the early 1970s, it was clear that the United States had overtaken the Soviet Union in the space race. However, the treaty was fresh, and the Soviet Union was still a powerful country not to be taken lightly. So the United States and Western countries behaved in a manner that was consistent, for the most part, with their treaty obligations. American exceptionalism, which has always been what Americans have been legally demanding terrestrially on Earth, we are the biggest, most powerful nation, we are the world's policeman, therefore the rules that apply to everybody else don't apply to us, otherwise we will not be able to police the Earth and keep peace on Earth, etc., etc. This mentality and this ideology and this form of attitude started to make way into, well, American exceptionalism in outer space as well. We have the money, we have the funding, we have the technological know-how, and therefore, why must we proceed with our hands tied behind our backs in a manner that would leave us equal with other states? Under a lot of pressure, the Obama regime back in 2015 sent a bill through Congress, which became the Commercial Space Launch Competitiveness Act, which was, for the first time, a law passed in any country on Earth that was in direct conflict with the wording of the Outer Space Treaty. Because this act allows US industries, the American private sector, to engage in commercial activities in space. Engage in commercial activities in space up to and including for-profit mining of minerals, whether you have the technology to do it from the moon, any asteroid, any other planet, as long as it is financially feasible to do so, then by all means, private sector industries go ahead and do it. But the private sector never does that for the benefit of all nations on Earth. The private sector says, I'm investing and I want to profit from the investments. Therefore, the private sector wants proprietary rights. They want ownership to buy, to sell the commodities that they are now dealing with, to rent them out, to do what they wish with them. This is a clear violation of the treaty to which the United States is a founding member. But the United States is a powerful state. Other states are not powerful states, and therefore, if they break their treaty commitments, in effect, there is nothing that the rest of the world can do about it. Fast forwarding 10 years from the Act, we are now on the cusp of what is being called the commercial revolution. Costs have come down. Big private enterprises in the States, Bezos, the owner of Amazon, Musk, and even our own, what's his name? The chap who has Virgin. Sorry, Branson, yes. They've invested heavily in commercial activities. Commercial revolution, they say, will bring benefits. People will spend money, profits will be made, those profits will be invested into further technological developments. That's the line coming from big business. But unfortunately, that's not really the case. And as I usually tell my students, if you want to know where the truth lies, look under the carpets and look behind the curtains. The truth does not lie in the formal press communiques that are issued by big multinational companies or by governments. What is going to happen at the cusp of this commercial revolution is states, governments are going to give up their duty to legislate and their duty to regulate. Therefore, instead of sustainable exploration of space, which we've had more or less in the past, we are going to move towards profit-driven activities by the private sector, which are going to actually be harmful. Harmful in many contexts. If this move actually does happen. Harmful in the context of the old great power rivalries that used to exist in the Victorian age between Britain and Russia, for example, and then in much of the second half of the 20th century between the United States and the Soviet Union. The United States today has the know-how, it has the technology, it has the funding and the investments to go ahead. The Russians are not going to like it. The Chinese are not going to like it. Emerging economies like India are not going to like it. What will they do? They cannot meet and match American spending. Therefore, their reaction is going to be a reaction that is focused and centered on militarization. So, if the Russians can't spend as much as the Americans are spending, or the Chinese can't, or the Indians can't, what will they spend money on? On precision missiles that will target satellites in orbit once you calculate the orbit of the satellite, and then from Earth, you will target a satellite and you will take it down. And this has already been experimented by the Chinese on their own satellites, by India on one of its own satellites, and by the Russians on their own. So if we can track down and calculate exactly when we need to press the trigger on a missile to go, leave the atmosphere, track a satellite on a particular orbit, and then hit it, destroy it. If we can do it on one of our own, we can do it on any satellite that doesn't belong to us that we are tracking. Now, you might take out satellites that give vital intelligence information to the enemy, to the United States. You might use it to hit satellites that give peculiar or specific benefits in terms of GPS, for example, or telecommunications, whatever you need to do to weaken the position of your enemy. And this threat of militarization increases when American competitors cannot compete with the Americans in what the Americans are doing. Intensification of global inequality, we'll talk about that a little bit later on, and environmental degradation, again, we will talk about that a little bit later on. So if we want to stop these things happening, it is my opinion that there should not be a commercial revolution. It is my opinion that the private sector must, as in the past, continue to take a second seat. Policy for outer space must be made by governments in a framework that has already been agreed and accepted under the auspices of the UN back in the 1960s. Once governments make policies, then the private sector will act if it is in their financial interests in line with those policies. But you cannot let the private sector loose to implement policy, because the private sector thinks about one thing and one thing only, and that is financial returns. This one. Right, so the Global Risks Report from 2022 from the World Economic Forum, they have approximated that in the 64 years between Sputnik 1 and the end of 2021, roughly 11,000 satellites had been launched. Of these 11,000 satellites, we have 1 million pieces of debris floating around, orbiting the Earth in space, with a size of 1 centimeter or larger. It's much more difficult to track the pieces of debris that are smaller than a centimeter, and therefore those numbers are not fully known. The World Economic Forum is saying within the next couple of decades, we're going to have a further 70,000 satellite launches. So in 64 years, 11,000, but in the following couple of decades, another 70,000. How much orbiting junk, how much debris is this going to entail? And this needs to be dealt with because space junk is an accident waiting to happen already. You've heard about how many times the International Space Station has had to temporarily boost itself up into a new orbit in order to allow for space junk that had been calculated to possibly hit the ISS to pass through before the ISS returns back down to its original orbit. This is an accident waiting to happen. It might happen today, tomorrow, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, but it is going to happen. Each one of these missile tests where India, China, Russia, and the United States have hit their own satellites in order to destroy them, creates debris. And then we have the domino effect. They're going to hit other bits of debris, and there's going to be more and more and more. And there are no longer any stable orbits for these. You never know where debris is going to end up. And you might think, well, of course the lawyers can deal with these things. They can't. There is another treaty dealing with liability in space. Two problems. Not all spacefaring nations have signed this liability treaty. Not all nations that within the next 20 years will become spacefaring. Spacefaring in terms of having the indigenous capacity to send a satellite up into one full orbit, are going to join it. Even those who have joined are going to deny liability. And it's difficult to prove whose debris coming from what and where and when hit the satellite that was destroyed. And even if you can prove it, but it's debris from the Chinese or the Americans or the Russians or Britain or France who have a veto in the Security Council, there's nothing you can do about it, even if they are clearly, evidentially liable. In the international order, you can go to the International Court of Justice. You can get a judgment. These 5 states have a veto on the Security Council, which means they will not enforce the judgment. Once the judgment is not enforced, the International Court of Justice will send them to the Security Council for the Security Council to force them to enforce the judgment, and on the Security Council, they will say, here's my veto. And there is past experience of this. Back in the early 1980s, when Nicaragua took the United States to the ICJ, International Court of Justice, over American aggression against Nicaragua, the Americans were really laid back. We don't care. They said we won't even bother to turn up in the court. What's the court going to do? Issue a judgment against us? So what? And the court did issue the judgment. The United States refused to comply. The court sent the dossier to the Security Council, and the United States said, well, we own the Security Council, here's our veto. Nicaragua got nothing. If they can do it in terms of disputes on planet Earth, they will definitely do it in terms of disputes in outer space. This graph here, it only goes up to 2020, but you can see right at the bottom, payloads, which is the stuff that possibly is of benefit. Then on top of it, red, debris, and dark blue, rocket bodies, and then other rocket mission-related objects, and then unidentified objects, what we have in orbit today. If it's unidentified, what does it mean? It could be a spy satellite. Now, why are spy satellites unidentified? Because there's another treaty that says that this is the registration treaty. If you want to send a satellite up into space, you will register it with the United Nations. You will say what the satellite is going up into space to do and what its orbit is going to be. And that register is maintained by the Secretary General of the United Nations, and it's open access for everybody to see. So if they want to send another satellite up, they will not send it into an orbit that interferes with yours. But if you're sending up spy satellites, you're not going to register it, even though you're a member of the registration treaty. Because registering it is you announcing to the world that we've sent up a satellite with these specifications on this orbit, and here's the address, now come and hit it. Come and cause problems. Create electromagnetic interference. So they don't do it. And these unidentified objects could also be a cause of problems in the future. And if today states are not registering military satellites, what is going to stop private sector enterprises from not registering their so-called commercial satellites and payloads in the future? This you've probably seen, a still image from a SpaceX live stream video, a Tesla car orbiting around the Earth in February 18. Some scientists whose job is much more interesting than mine carried out simulations, and they determined that in a 15 million year time span, there's a 22% possibility that the satellite will be pulled down by Earth's gravity, or a 12% possibility that it will be pulled into Venus's orbit and then crash onto Venus within the next 15 million years. Now, you might say, 15 million years, who cares? We should care. But 15 million years, that's a long time. 15 million years is peanuts in terms of the 4.5 billion years that Earth has been in existence. And we on Earth are custodians of planet Earth for future generations, 15 million years from now or 50 million years from now. What benefit does sending this into space give other than somebody saying, I can do it, and I've got the finances to do it, and everybody can hate me, but I don't care? Yes? What other benefit does this give mankind? None. Occupying an orbit around the Earth, highly elliptical, and not an orbit that would otherwise probably be used for scientific experimentation or anything else that's useful, but still impractical, still only the value of gimmickry. If Musk can do this, then tomorrow a Russian oligarch wants to do the same. The day after tomorrow, somebody from somewhere else wants to do the same. And again, we are increasing space junk, and we are spending money that should be better spent on other resources just to satisfy the egos of people who should know better. Another massive problem with regard to this so-called commercial revolution is space tourism, which for the most part isn't even space tourism. It's mesosphere tourism. At most, maybe the mesopoles, not higher than that. A suborbital flight, which is what, for example, Virgin Atlantic is doing, that doesn't leave the upper layers of the atmosphere, is not really space flight. But if you can flog it a space flight to people who have more money than common sense, they have the ambition to say, I was up in space, then you're going to make money out of it. Then it's commercially viable. Then you profit. Then that makes you an important person. So much of space tourism is not really space tourism, and is not planned to be space tourism. Uh, anyway, where is space? Where does the Earth end and where does space start? If it were to be space tourism, what border or what boundary do we need to pass? There is no agreement on the boundary between Earth and space because Western governments, specifically the United States, wants it to be very low. Other governments, specifically less developed countries, want it to be as high as it can be. The United States, ever since the 1960s, has been saying that outer space starts at 50 miles, 80 kilometers above the Earth. So if you pass above 50 miles or 80 kilometers, which is the mesosphere still, it's the atmosphere, you are in space. And that is good for all the commercial providers. As long as you take them about 50 miles, then they are in space, even though they are not in space. But it was good then in the 1960s for the United States because whatever technology the Americans had, and maybe the Soviets had, but everybody else did not have, that could give them information or intelligence or any kind of advantage, flying above 50 miles meant that it is flying in space. Therefore, it is not interfering with the sovereign airspace of other countries. Yes? Russians today cannot fly their commercial jets or their fighter aircraft over British airspace without the permission of the British government because the British government has jurisdiction and full sovereign rights, not over just the territory, the land, but airspace above the UK. But if you define outer space to be at 50 miles, anything that is flying over and above 50 miles will not be flying over airspace. It's in outer space, therefore no restrictions. So strategically then, it was good for the Americans. Today, financially, it is good for the so-called space tourism providers. And the costs. The first space tourist, Dennis Tito, he spent 20 million to go to the ISS for 8 days. Cost him so $2.5 million, dollars, US dollars a day for 8 days, 20 million. Now, Virgin Galactic has been selling its little suborbital flight tickets for £450,000, and they're coming down to roughly 250,000. But that's not 8 days, that's a few hours maximum. And you might be lucky enough to have a couple of minutes of weightlessness up there as well. And that's good enough for you to come down to Earth and brag to everybody on your social scene that I was in space. Bezos, maybe more clever than Branson or more commercially minded, said that he's going to auction off the first ticket for his new Shepherd launcher. And that first ticket at auction made him 28 million. Now, the rest of the tickets are, of course, going to be sold at lower prices. But again, why? At such a cost for the environment. And when we talk about environmental costs, what rockets do is leave behind a lot of soot, black carbon, as well as carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. What part of the atmosphere? Stratosphere. And that is part of the atmosphere that doesn't have rain clouds. And therefore there is no water cycle. And therefore it cannot be washed down to Earth through natural processes. So you have the soot accumulating and accumulating and accumulating there. Now, for a reasonable and rational space mission, when you do your cost-benefit analysis, it's fine, it's okay. You want to send up the Hubble telescope. The cost in terms of black soot is negligible. You want to send up James Webb. Of course, the cost in terms of black soot in the stratosphere is negligible. But when it comes to sending that gimmick vehicle, the Tesla car that Musk sent into outer space, why? When it comes to so-called space tourism, why? We do not yet know the consequences of black carbon accumulating in the stratosphere with no natural way to resolve the problem. We've dealt with depletion of ozone, and we know that we need to reduce and phase out use of CFCs to resolve the problem. And that's been, to a large extent, successful over the last 30, 40 years. We still have a hole in the southern hemisphere near the South Pole, but the northern hemisphere is more or less okay. But when it comes to black soot, research carried out by American scientists, and these are federal scientists, so scientists working for the federal government, their research has showed that in terms of soot, the annual mean temperature in the stratosphere has increased by as much as 1.5 Kelvin. Unlike problems with the ozone layer, this is occurring in the northern hemisphere, not the southern hemisphere. And in parts of the northern hemisphere that are closer to the North Pole than the equator. Their research hasn't shown why. Scientists don't know and don't understand the long-term effects of soot lingering in the stratosphere. Given that we know we are creating a problem, and it's a problem that doesn't need to be created because tourism is not a need, is not a requirement. Scientific experimentation is, James Webb is, Hubble is. This isn't. Why are we allowing it to happen? What's going to happen in 30, 40, or 50 years' time when the next generation or the generation after now has a massive problem to deal with and can't deal with it because nature is not on their side? There is no weather, there are no clouds to create rain to bring the soot down. So, again, cost-benefit analysis. Is space tourism viable? If it's not viable, then why is it going ahead? Can't the ultra-rich engage themselves with more meaningful activities? Of course they can. And the argument, of course, coming from the big corporations and from the US government is it creates wealth. But that wealth isn't going into the treasury. That wealth isn't going into public funds. That wealth is going into the pockets of the wannabe oligarchs and into the pockets of the shareholders as dividends. So that is not money that is creating prosperity and wealth for the whole of the nation, whether it's the United States or elsewhere. It is just perpetuating a system in which the rich get richer and the poor have to deal with and suffer with the consequences of the trouble that the rich create for them. Right, so the Virgin Galactic makes more use of synthetic hydrocarbon and nitrous oxides in their hybrid rockets than other traditional rockets do. They emit more soot again, and moving on. Another important area is an area which is much nearer to you and your areas of specialism, and that is both observational astronomy and radio astronomy. Miniaturization of satellites, creation of constellations, satellite constellations. So Starlink, one example, is interfering with radio astronomy. The second generation Starlink satellites emit electromagnetic radiation up to a factor of 32 stronger than the old first generation Starlink satellites. And you might think, well, this can probably be resolved, can't it? Well, maybe it can. But at the moment, this electromagnetic radiation is interfering with the wavelengths and the frequency range that is used by radio astronomy. The ITU, International Telecommunications Union, the organization that is responsible for giving geostationary orbits to states, and also responsible for dividing up various radio frequencies, has set aside the frequency range between 150.05 and 153 megahertz for radio astronomy. Now these second generation Starlinks are interfering with that. To compound the problem, the US government has allowed the second generation satellites to orbit as low as 360 kilometers above the Earth, whereas the first generation was 550 kilometers above. So, at a lower orbit, bigger problem. When you talk to industry, they say, oh, we need these new satellites. We need to have them in place because we need excess capacity for telecommunications on Earth, for internet on Earth. The areas that need it, and they will always tell you, look at Africa. Africa has a problem with regard to telecommunications because it's a very large continent and the governments haven't invested, and therefore the people need to use satellite technology in order to be able to use the internet and communicate with each other. Which may make sense until you ask them, at what cost are you giving them subscriptions to use satellite internet? And the costs are prohibitive because it's the same cost that somebody would pay in Switzerland. And somebody in Africa who is struggling to feed his family and his children, etc., because of drought, because of famine, because of all of the other problems that the developed world is creating for them, is not in a place to pay the same subscription fees of $50-something per month. The income of the family is not $50 per month. So they cannot pay $50 per month just for subscription to satellite internet. In areas where people can afford it, they don't need it. Because in much of the United States, much of the Western world, much of Europe, we already have enough capacity. So all of this extra capacity is not needed for today. But all of this extra capacity is causing problems for radio astronomy. What do we prioritize? I'm not a scientist, but I would prioritize radio astronomy. And it's not just radio astronomy. Again, you're the scientist. So when it comes to observational, a camera in the Lowell Observatory is focused on the heavens. And what does it get? All of these streaks, satellites passing through. And the other picture, again, a Starlink constellation. This one probably taken from somebody's backyard, but still interfering with observational astronomy. And my question again is, at what cost? Why does scientific progress have to suffer because of private sector financial gain? So what can we do? There's a lot of things that can be done, but it needs the governments of powerful states to take back control. We have a treaty signed back in 1959, the Antarctic Treaty, which came into effect in 1961. If you imagine for a minute the Antarctic, where there is no full-time human presence because nobody can survive there. various scientific expeditions go and come from other countries, and there is temporary presence. But let's imagine Antarctic is part of outer space on Earth. What did the 1959 treaty say? No militarization of the Antarctic. So even governments who have people there, scientific teams there experimenting, they cannot send military force, guns, allegedly to protect their scientific teams. No nuclear weapons can be deployed on Antarctica. More importantly, no nuclear waste can be dumped in Antarctica. There will be no exploitation of natural resources on Antarctica. And of course, Antarctica is rich in mineral resources under the ice. So, if you can get the Antarctic Treaty to work on Earth, and it works because there is consensus among states, we now need to create this consensus that the so-called commercial revolution is a lot of faff, and behind the faff, there is nothing positive for the future of humanity. That way, we might get somewhere. Otherwise, we won't. And if that doesn't happen, without legal constraints, putting back the private sector in the backseat, the private sector funding government initiatives rather than the private sector being allowed to drive the train and take the initiative and do what it wishes, we're going to have what I mentioned earlier, and I said I will come back to, global inequality of wealth and inequality of opportunity. The rich countries that can fund exploitation of space will do so, and they will become richer and richer. And the poor countries that can't will remain stagnant. And as they remain stagnant and this disproportionality of wealth grows, people are going to start to migrate because people want better for their children, their children's children, etc., etc. They want to move to greener pastures. They want to move to places where there is enough decent soil and there is enough water for them to grow their crops and feed their children. Where are those greener pastures? Europe is one example. But Europe is setting up Fortress Europe. Send all of the boat people back. We don't want them. We're already full. Why are the boat people coming? Is one of the reasons the boat people are coming, for example, from Africa, not that their economies have been destroyed, not completely, but to some extent because of EU economic policies. And if you can tick that off, then the EU itself, Europe itself, is partially responsible. And you cannot expect them to stay and starve and die. Of course they're going to migrate. And let's not forget, who were the original boat people? 400 years ago, who crossed the Atlantic to North America, to the United States, to South America, Spain and Portugal, who went all the way to Australia and New Zealand? Europeans. The original boat people. They went for better economic opportunity. They went for wealth creation. They went to see where they can live, where they can farm, or what resources they can find and bring back. That's how humanity operates. It's one human race, one planet Earth. Nature does not create borders. Borders are being created by human beings. But when human beings become too greedy and they don't understand that if the balance is broken, you're going to force migration, then you can't stand and try to stand up and deny migrants the right and the opportunity to feed themselves and their kids. You have Trump and his so-called big, beautiful wall in the south of the United States. You have European countries with their policies here. It's only going to get worse because as the people who are disinherited become more and more desperate, as they become poorer, then they will come with different means. And they will try to stay using any means necessary. And things become ugly. And when things become ugly, then you have the basic ingredients for war starting. And humanity can't afford that today. We're already dealing with the loss of biodiversity, the sixth great extinction that we're in now, or what they call it, the great Anthropocene extinction. We're already dealing with that. Why are we trying to speed it up by irrational actions? And by irrational actions, I mean allowing policy making to be done not by the so-called village elders, the people who should be making policy in government, the people who are trained to do so, have experience to do so, but are being made by oligarchs and wannabe oligarchs who have their own financial interests only in mind. So these things have to be considered, and once they are considered, I'm hoping that you would come to the same conclusion that I've come to, and that is commercialization of space activity has more harm than it has benefits, and therefore, when you do the cost-benefit analysis, you should agitate for a return to the days when policy was made by governments and not by oligarchs. So that's basically it from me. Thank you for your time, and sorry if I bored you, but yeah.